They called it Cerro Dormido, the Sleeping Hill. On paper, it was the safest assignment the university had offered in years. No recorded eruptions, no active fumaroles, no recent seismic swarm. A dead volcano with a picturesque crater and a perfect slope for installing a new ring of ultra-sensitive seismic and infrasound sensors. The kind of place you send students when you want data, not headlines. They went up in 6. 2 senior geologists, 3 graduate students, and 1 field technician, Bruno, who knew every cable, battery, and frequency by heart. The plan was simple. Camp on the upper slope for 3 nights, test a new array of infrasound microphones, sync them with the seismographs, and come back with boring, clean, textbook-perfect recordings. That was the dream. The first night was quiet in the way that makes seasoned field teams nervous. No distant thunder, no rumbling trucks on valley roads, no dogs barking from the scattered farms below. Just the wind coming over the lip of the crater, the faint hiss of gas stoves, and the soft clicks of equipment cycling through self-tests. Around midnight, the infrasound array started picking up something. At first, it looked like random low-frequency noise, long, slow waves that rolled under the audible range, the kind of signal you'd blame on distant ocean swell or faraway storms. But there was no ocean for hundreds of kilometers, and the sky was brutally clear. Bruno listened through the monitoring headphones, frowning. "It's too regular," he said. "It's not wind, it's pulsing." The others were half asleep in their tents, so he recorded a few minutes, tagged the file, and told himself he'd analyze it more carefully in the morning. He unplugged the headphones, zipped the tent, and tried to pretend that the weight in his chest was just altitude. The second night tore that illusion apart. By then, the team had installed a second set of microphones closer to the crater rim, lowering one sensor into a narrow vent no wider than a backpack. The cable disappeared into darkness until the lantern light couldn't touch it anymore. "It's dead," one of the students joked. "Just rockin' old ash." They laughed, but no one liked standing too close to that hole. At 1:37 a.m., all 6 woke up at the same time. There had been no sound, no tremor, no flash of light. Just the sudden shared feeling that someone had called them. Not by voice, but by presence. As if a thought had pushed through the fabric of their dreams and surfaced them into cold, thin air. The tent fabric rustled as zippers opened almost in unison. "Did you hear that?" one of the students asked. "No," Bruno said. "I didn't hear. I just knew we had to get up." The wind had dropped. The mountain felt still, the way a room feels when the person inside stops breathing. Down at the monitoring station, the laptop screen was alive with data. The infrasound trace that had been a slow, rolling wave the night before had condensed into something tighter, more deliberate. Peaks and troughs at oddly human intervals. Not the messy chaos of the atmosphere, but a pattern. The senior geologist, Helena, stared at the graphs and felt her scalp prickle. "It looks like respiration," she whispered, "like a breathing cycle." They argued about it for a while, trying to fit it into familiar boxes. Pressure changes, microbursts of gas, some artifact in the cables. Anything but what their instincts were whispering. Then Bruno put the headphones on again. For a long minute, he didn't speak. His face went slack, then tightened in a way the others had never seen. Finally, he took the headphones off with a slow, shaking movement, as if they'd grown hot. "Someone just said my name," he said. The students rolled their eyes at first. It had to be a joke, a stress reaction. But Helena knew Bruno. He'd spent a decade listening to ugly, distorted noise from broken sensors and old recordings without flinching. He wasn't joking now. "Play it back," she said. He hesitated, then routed the live infrasound feed through a filter that shifted the frequencies into the audible range. What came out of the portable speakers was a deep, rolling bed of sound, like an endless storm heard through walls of stone. And then, woven into it, something else. Not words exactly, not at first, just shapes of sound that had the rhythm of speech, even if the syllables dissolved into static. The team listened in a ring of flashlight beams, eyes reflecting pale light, breath clouding in the cooling air. The first time it happened, they almost missed it. No. The eor dragged like something scraping along rock, the vowels stretched too far. but they all heard it. Not once, but twice. The second time, the pitch curved upward at the end, like a question. Bruno yanked the cable out. That's enough. It's interference, a glitch, something. Helena's hands were cold, but not from the mountain air anymore. We're stopping after tonight, she said. We've got enough data. We pack up at dawn. No one argued. The problem was, dawn felt like it never arrived. The hours between 2 and 5 a.m. stretched into something thick and slow. The team tried to rest inside their tents, but every time they closed their eyes, they felt the same intrusive pressure in their chests, like someone leaning on them from the inside. When Bruno couldn't take it anymore, he checked the time on his watch, 3:12 a.m. He lay back down, closed his eyes for what felt like 20 minutes, then checked again. 3:13 a.m. Outside, the wind had stopped completely. The silence was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. Every rustle of nylon, every cough, every shift in a sleeping bag sounded wrong, too loud, as if the mountain were amplifying them. Then the laptop alarm went off. Helena stumbled out of her tent, heart pounding. The alarm was set only for significant anomalies, strong tremors, large pressure spikes, or signals that matched certain dangerous patterns. This one was different. On the screen, the infrasound trace had rearranged itself into a jagged, repeating structure. Not respiration this time, not a smooth wave. It looked like a heartbeat. 68 beats per minute, one of the students whispered, doing the math on the time axis. That's resting heart rate. For what? Another asked. The mountain? Nobody laughed. The speakers were still unplugged, but the graphs were enough. Every peak came at a perfectly timed interval. No variation, no drift. Just a pulse, steady and indifferent. Then a new anomaly appeared on the secondary screen. The system had started tagging certain sound clusters automatically, grouping similar patterns for later analysis. It had created a new category and, without anyone touching the keyboard, named it Phonetics ST. Inside that category, the software had isolated several segments of infrasound that shared a similar shape. The timestamps corresponded to the moments the team had felt the urge to wake up. Helena swallowed hard and opened one of the segments, letting the software shift it into audible range for just a second. She didn't even need the headphones. The laptop's tiny speaker whispered it into the cold air between tents. This time, it wasn't Bruno's name. It was hers. L-E-Na. Half-formed, distorted, dragged over stone, but close enough that her body recognized it before her brain quiz. They were almost running when they started to pack. Cables were yanked out without logging, stakes abandoned, one of the microphones left in the vent because no one wanted to lean over that dark mouth again. Bags were thrown together in ugly knots. No field team packed like that unless something had gone very, very wrong. The descent should have taken 3 hours. They reached the first marker post in what felt like 20 minutes, only to realize it was the same marker they'd passed an hour earlier on the way down. The GPS units insisted they were moving, but the coordinates barely changed. It was like walking on a treadmill made of rock and ash. Behind them, muffled by distance and stone, the mountain kept breathing. Later, searching the data at the university, they found something worse. The recordings didn't stop when they broke camp. The abandoned vent microphone, powered by its own battery, kept transmitting until the storage filled up. The last several hours of infrasound were dominated by the same pulsing heartbeat pattern. But now, between the beats, more phonetic clusters had appeared, dozens of them. When the software finished processing, it produced a list of sound shapes that matched human names with high probability. Not just their names of people they knew, family, colleagues, a child who hadn't even been born at the time of the expedition, but whose name Helena would choose 5 years later. As if the mountain had kept learning, repeating, practicing, like something awake, under kilometers of rock, trying to get better at calling them. They never went back to Cerro Dormido. The microphones they designed for that expedition were quietly repurposed for other projects, other mountains. The raw data was split between different archives under different labels, as if scattering it might dilute whatever had happened up there. It didn't. Sometimes, when Bruno calibrates new equipment in the lab late at night, The test tones will glitch for a fraction of a second. Just enough to bend into something that sounds like a stretched syllable. Brew. He always switches the system off immediately, because now he knows, somewhere, deep below a mountain no one believes is alive, something is still practicing his name. The volcano didn't even have a proper name anymore. On old maps it was labeled Caldera 12B, a leftover from a regional survey done decades ago. Locals called it the Hollow, not because of any lava tubes or caves, but because for as long as anyone remembered, it had felt empty. No eruptions in recorded history, no steam vents, no gas emissions on satellite, just a wide, shallow crater filled with fine, gray ash that the wind never seemed to move. That's what made it perfect for the project. The team was part of a multinational initiative to test new ground-penetrating imaging using a mix of electromagnetic pulses and drone-mounted scanners. Their goal was to build a high-resolution 3D model of the subsurface under dormant calderas, to see old magma chambers, solidified conduits, hidden layers of prehistoric eruptions. It was meant to be boring science in a boring place. They arrived with 3 off-road vehicles, 2 portable base stations, a dozen crates of equipment, and 4 drones with reinforced rotors for high-altitude, dusty environments. The first day went exactly as the funding agencies like it. Sunny, efficient, uneventful. They hauled gear up to the rim, set up the main station with a clear line of sight over the crater, and did a few short test flights. The drones hummed across the circular basin, mapping the ash surface and bouncing signals into the ground. The data looked good. Beneath the crater, as expected, lay a layered jumble of old lava flows and brittle, fractured rock. There were voids here and there, but nothing especially unusual. No massive cavern, no suspicious fluid pockets. Just the long-cooled skeleton of a volcano that had burned out before humans ever walked the valley. They planned to sleep at a lower camp and come back the next day for full-range imaging. Just as they were about to pack the drones away, one of the local guides pointed at the basin. "You see that?" he asked. "That?" The sun was dropping behind the western ridge, taking the direct glare with it. In the softer light, the crater floor looked less monochrome. Here and there, under the ash, something faintly glimmered. Metal, the team thought at first. Maybe old survey markers, or debris from an undocumented expedition. But the specks were too numerous and too evenly spaced, like a grid that only appeared when the light struck at a certain angle. "Probably reflection artifacts in your eyes," the project lead, Miller, said. "We'll check it in the morning." They did not wait for morning. One of the younger researchers, Aisha, volunteered to send a drone closer while there was still light. She piloted it down toward the basin, dropping altitude until the rotors kicked up swirls of grey dust. On the monitor, the ash looked strangely fine, not granular like sand, but almost like powdered stone or something burned down beyond recognition. The tiny sparkles they'd seen from the rim were more visible now. They weren't on the surface, they were below it. The drone's camera auto-adjusted, flickering as it hunted for contrast. Between waves of ash, something flashed, not constantly, not like a reflection following the sun, but in short, erratic bursts. "Are those LEDs?" someone joked. "Could be mineral crystals catching the light," Miller said. "You get weird optical effects in volcanic ash layers." Aisha frowned. "Crystals don't flicker on and off." The drone's sensors reported no unusual heat signature, no electromagnetic interference. Just a sterile field of dust with occasional spikes in light intensity, like tiny lightning strikes too weak to show anywhere but on camera. They logged the coordinates and pulled the drone back. That night in the lower camp, the team watched the footage on a laptop until the generator's fuel alarms began to whine. Frame by frame, zoomed in until the image pixelated, the flashes looked almost organic. Not perfectly round, not clean-edged, but irregular, like light seen through water or glass. A static discharge. Bioluminescent bacteria. Glitch in the sensor. Everyone had a theory, no one had an answer. They went back up at dawn, half excited, half uneasy. The plan was to deploy the full imaging sequence over the crater, focusing extra passes on the coordinates where the flashes had appeared. They wanted to see if there was a void, a cavity, or any unusual structure beneath that patch of ash. As the sun climbed, the crater floor went back to its uniform grey. No sparkles, no glimmers, just dead dust under a cloudless sky. If it was an optical trick, it won't repeat, Miller said, more to himself than to anyone else. Aisha launched the first drone anyway. They started with high-altitude passes, sending pulses into the ground and recording the echoes. The data fed into the base station, building up cross-sections of the caldera in cold, color-coded slices. For the first 20 minutes, everything looked consistent. Then Section 31 rendered. On the screen, beneath the central part of the crater, the normal jumble of rock and fused layers gave way to something organized. A roughly spherical zone, 30 meters below the surface, returned almost none of the signals. Not because it was empty. Emptiness had a particular signature, but because the pulses seemed to bend around it, as if something inside refused to be scanned. Could be a pocket of highly conductive material, one of the techs said, though he didn't sound convinced. Or a very fine layering messing with the return. Aisha overlaid the coordinates of the flickering lights from the night before. They matched the upper boundary of the sphere almost perfectly. Drop the altitude, she said. I want the drone closer. Miller hesitated. We're not authorized to disturb the ash layer directly. The permits were very specific. We're not digging, she said. We're just flying lower. He gave a curt nod. The drone descended in careful increments, its rotors pushing ash away in slow, spiraling patterns. On the monitor, the dust moved like smoke, curling and settling in unnaturally uniform waves. Look at the edge of that, someone whispered. The ash wasn't falling randomly. It was forming a faint outline of something curved beneath the surface, like a buried shell. Every time the drone shifted position, the pattern changed, as if the ash were trying to hide the shape, then failing, then trying again. Then the flashes returned. At first, just one. A tiny pulse of light from below the ash, too brief to be a reflection of the drone. Then another, a little to the left. Then 3 at once, arranged in a crooked line. The imaging station pinged. The new data passes showed minor changes in the boundary of the spherical anomaly. It seemed to swell and contract by a few centimeters, synchronized with the intervals between flashes. It's reacting, Aisha said. To what? Miller asked. To us. He almost told her to pull the drone back, but the funding reports flashed in his mind, the talk of breakthroughs, of firsts. Instead, he told her to hold steady altitude and sweep across the crater to see if the lights were constrained to one area. They weren't. As the drone glided along a programmed grid pattern, more flashes appeared. They weren't random. On the playback, slowed down and stabilized, the lights were clearly switching on and off in sequences. The team watched, at first intrigued, then unsettled, as the patterns grew longer, more complex. Short bursts, long gaps, clusters. It looks like a code, one of the techs said softly, possibly binary. Or just flickering crystals, Miller insisted, but no one was listening anymore. When the first light appeared directly under the drone's shadow, perfectly centered in the frame, Aisha's fingers tightened on the controls. A second light appeared beside it, then a third. They formed a triangle. Then a fourth and fifth blinked into existence outside the triangle, in a line that curved subtly. On the monitor, it looked disturbingly like an eye opening under a film of ash. The drone's feed cut out, not gradually, not with the slow loss of signal they were used to when a drone flew behind terrain. It died in a single, clean frame. 1 second, the Eye of Lights was there. The next, a frozen image, and then a black screen. We lost it, Aisha said, voice thin. It's gone. They tried the failsafe recall, no response. They tried the locator ping, nothing. The drone's GPS signal had vanished, as if the sky itself had blinked. Aisha wanted to send another drone, but Miller said no. We've got enough anomalous data already, he snapped. We're not sacrificing another unit to a glitch. They pivoted to groundwork. If they couldn't see the sphere clearly from above, they could at least take more precise readings from the rim, maybe drill a narrow core sample later under proper protocols. But as the sun moved, the crater began to change. The ash, which had remained eerily flat all morning, started to shift in larger, slower waves, not blowing toward any particular direction, just rising and falling in place, as if something beneath were breathing. The air temperature at the rim climbed by 3 degrees in under 10 minutes, though no hot gases were detected. The instruments recorded slight oscillations in gravity readings, the kind of tiny fluctuations you'd expect near very dense, moving mass. Then, the lights appeared to the naked eye. At first, tiny greenish glows under the ash, barely visible. Then brighter, whiter, more numerous, until it looked like a drowned city seen through murky water. "Everyone back," Miller said. "Now." No one argued this time. They packed in practiced silence, glancing back too often at the basin, at the slow, swelling waves of dust and the growing constellation of lights beneath. None of them wanted to be standing at the rim if that anomaly decided it didn't like being watched. They left one base station running, pointed at the crater with its instruments on automatic, recording until the batteries died. No one returned to retrieve it. The files were recovered weeks later when a local rescue team went up at the university's request, assuming some kind of mechanical failure. They found the base station half buried in a layer of unusually fine ash that seemed to cling to cables and casings like static charged powder. The last hour of data from Caldera 12B never made it into any official report. Unofficially, the researchers shared it on private drives and late-night calls. The images showed the ash surface pulsing subtly, in sync with the gravitational anomalies. The lights beneath grew brighter and more organized, until they formed patterns so unmistakably geometric that no one dared call them random. But it was the final minute that made some of them quit the project entirely. Right before the batteries flatlined, the instruments recorded one last surge. The lights under the ash moved. They rose toward the surface, compressing into a ring, then into a cluster directly beneath the base station's line of sight. The ash swelled upward, as if pushed from below, but never quite broke. One frame, almost too blurred to notice, captured something else. For a fraction of a second, the entire basin reflected the sky above. Not like glass, but like a dark pupil catching an image. The stars, invisible in the daylight, appeared in that reflection. But they were wrong, misplaced. Constellations bent into shapes that looked almost intentional. Then the feed cut. Later, when Aisha tried to explain why nighttime city lights made her nauseous now, she always came back to the same phrase. "It looked like something under that volcano turned over in its sleep," she said. "Not waking up, just changing sides." And every time she walked into a room with the lights off and saw the faint glimmer of electronics, standby LEDs, tiny power indicators in the dark, she had the same irrational fear. That if she stared too long, they'd start blinking back at her in a pattern she almost recognized. The volcano was a training ground before it was a research site. It sat at the end of a slow, winding road, rising out of scrubland and dry rivers. The locals called it Viejo Silencio, Old Silence, because even the birds avoided its upper slopes. No one in the nearby town could remember it ever smoking, much less erupting. That made it perfect for the emergency response program. Every year, new geological survey teams learned how to handle high-risk environments there, hiking in gear, setting up temporary stations, simulating data collection under pressure. The risk was theoretical, the danger carefully controlled. Until the year they decided to leave equipment up there for the winter. "We can turn the training site into a continuous monitoring station," the program director said. "Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Students train around real instruments, and we get long-term data on a dormant system." So they built a small, semi-permanent camp just below the crater rim. A cluster of 4 reinforced shelters, a buried power line from a distant substation, a satellite dish, and a ring of sensors that wrapped around the summit like a crown. For 6 months, the data was exactly what everyone expected. Boring. Tiny tremors too small to feel, temperature changes with the seasons, a bit of background noise from distant quarries. Then, early in autumn, the station went offline for 19 minutes. Outages happen. Ice, dust, hardware glitches. No one panicked. The system rebooted itself, reconnected, and backfilled the missing timestamps. Only later did someone notice that the missing 19 minutes weren't empty. The logs had data. They just weren't in the right place. The simplest way the analyst could explain it later was this. It looks like those 19 minutes happened twice. A chunk of data that should have belonged to Moro 3 or Moro 319 appeared again in the stream, with subtle differences, out of order, tucked between entries from later that morning. Seismic waves repeating with slightly altered amplitudes. Temperatures drifting by fractions of a degree, weird but not urgent. The urgent part came with the first winter expedition. A small team was sent up before the snow sealed off the pass completely. 3 researchers and 2 technicians, tasked with checking the station in person, tightening anything the storms might rip loose, and installing a new generation of time-synced cameras. They signed in at the regional base at 0641, according to the logbook. They radioed in at 0803 when they reached the halfway point. They sent one more check-in at 0917 from the last line of trees. The next expected call from the summit never came. At first, the base assumed weak reception. Happens all the time around high ridges. But when noon passed with no update, then 1 o'clock, then 2, the coordinator ordered a second team to prepare for a follow-up. Before they could leave, the summit station called in. A voice everyone recognized, the field lead Lucas, came through the radio, crackling but clear. "Summit reached," he said. "Camp is in visual range. Station appears intact. Entering site for inspection." The timestamp on the recording read 1409. Relief washed through the control room. The rescue prep was postponed. There were mutters about faulty handsets, dead batteries, miscommunication. Then, at 1416, another call came in. Same frequency, same call sign, same lead. "Summit reached," Lucas said again. "Camp is in visual range. Station appears intact. Entering site for inspection." The voice was identical. The cadence, the background wind, even the slight cough halfway through the sentence. The only difference was the timestamp. The control room went silent. "Playback error?" someone suggested. But the equipment showed 2 separate transmissions, logged at different seconds, arriving with tiny atmospheric variations that no simple replay could fake. "Ask them to repeat," the coordinator said, throat dry. They sent a call. The answer came back after a too long pause. "This is Summit Team," the voice said. "Why are you asking us to repeat check-in? We just did." "Which one?" the coordinator asked before he could stop himself. A hiss of static. Then Lucas's voice, more cautious. "The one when we reached the summit, 12 minutes ago. We can see the camp right now. Do you copy?" They compared the signal in real time to the 2 earlier recordings. It matched both. By then, the second team was already en route, a rescue unit in everything but name. Up on the volcano, the first team walked toward the silent camp. The shelters sat in a shallow depression just below the rim, half dusted with the first light snow, satellite dish tilted toward a blank sky. "Looks normal," one of the techs said. "Normal for a ghost town," another replied. The station door was closed. There were no footprints in the fresh powder, leading from the path to the threshold. Lucas went first. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Equipment racks blinked with tiny indicator lights, screens in sleep mode, a faint hum from the power converters. No obvious damage. Then they saw the logbook. It lay open on the main desk, a cheap bound notebook used for redundant, handwritten records. The last entries should have been from the summer cruise, weeks ago. They weren't. The top line, in Lucas's own handwriting, read, "Arrival, 1409, summit reached, camp in visual range, station appears intact." Below it, same date, same ink color, slightly different pressure. "Arrival, 1409, summit reached, camp in visual range, station appears intact." He stared at it so long that the letters stopped meaning anything. "Did you write it twice?" one of the techs asked. "No," he said. "I just wrote that once. Just now. On the top line." The tech pointed at the second entry. "Then who wrote that one?" There was no indentation from a different pen, no variation in the slant. It was as if the sentence had repeated itself, with minute imperfections only someone who knew Lucas's handwriting intimately would catch. The kind of differences you might see if the same hand wrote the same sentence at slightly different moments, then both ended up on the same page. They checked the rest of the log. Scattered through the earlier pages, among perfectly normal entries, were duplicates like that. Pairs of lines that seemed to occupy the same date and time, saying almost the same thing with tiny, unnerving differences. They hadn't been there in summer. The program coordinator was certain of that. It was as if the camp itself had started to remember things twice. While the others worked through the equipment checklists, Lucas stepped outside to radio the base. "Station appears operational," he said. "We've got a logging issue. Might need to replace the manual records." He almost mentioned the doubled entry. Then something in his throat closed around the words. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement on the slope below. A line of 5 figures was making its way up the trail they'd used that morning. Same number, same colored jackets, same packs. For a second, he thought the rescue team had made record time. Then his heart gave a painful, stuttering thump. The lead figure had his gait. "Hold on," he said into the radio. He watched, breath freezing in the air, as the other team climbed steadily, exactly where the tracks in the snow should have been. Except there were no footprints. No mark, no disturbance. Just 5 silhouettes moving in perfect sync with something that wasn't the world he stood in. He couldn't see faces at that distance, but he knew, without knowing how, that if he saw his own, something in him would break. Behind him, one of the techs called out, "Lucas, you need to see this." He tore his eyes away from the slope. Inside the station, the main monitor had woken from sleep. The seismic feed, normally a calm line with occasional noise, was spiking in a peculiar pattern. Not large tremors, nothing that would shake the ground under their boots, but short, sharp pulses spaced just far enough apart to feel deliberate. "Is that an event?" the tech asked. "It looks like markers," another said, "like someone is tapping the sensors." They ran a quick cross-correlation between the pulses and the radio recordings. The peaks matched the syllables. Every time Lucas had said summit, a spike, camp, another, intact, 3 in rapid succession. It was as if the volcano had started underlining certain words in the data. He felt suddenly, absurdly exposed. The idea came into his mind fully formed and unwelcome. It's not just repeating time. It's learning how we arrive. The rescue team never saw the other silhouettes on the slope. When they finally reached the summit, hours later, delayed by weather that hadn't existed on the other crew's ascent, they found the station intact, the instruments humming, the shelters cold but safe. They also found 2 sets of handwritten logs. One, on the desk, catalogued their arrival and inspection in the coordinator's careful, neat script. The other, tucked under the logbook as if someone had slid it there in a hurry, was different. It contained the same entries, same dates and times, same words, but in places the ink broke into thin, wavering lines, as if the hand holding the pen had been trying to remember how much pressure to use. At the very bottom of that second notebook, on a page no one remembered writing in, a sentence appeared twice. First, in Lucas's handwriting, "We reached the summit at 14:09. The camp was waiting for us." Then beneath it, in a shakier, almost childlike version of the same hand, "We reached the summit at 14:09. Something else was waiting too. In the official version of events, the station on Viejo Silencio was decommissioned due to persistent instrument malfunction the following spring. Unofficially, no one wanted to train there anymore, because the last batch of raw data recovered from the sensors before shutdown showed something that never made it into the reports. Several days after the final expedition left and the camp was empty, the microphones on the summit recorded faint radio chatter. No vehicles approached, no boots touched the snow. But the words that drifted through the static were clear. "Summit reached," a voice said, overlapping itself with a glitching echo. "Camp is in visual range. Station appears intact, entering site for inspection." And in the gaps between the syllables, the volcano itself answered. Not with words, not with rumbling, but with tiny, precisely spaced pulses. Like a mountain rehearsing a phrase, it knew it would have to say again.